All right, joining me once again here on the Matthew Filipowicz Show is Natasha Geiling. Natasha is a climate reporter for ThinkProgress, which you can find at thinkprogress.org. You can also follow her on Twitter at @ngeiling. Natasha, thank you so much for being on the show again.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. Good to be back.
All right, so Natasha, most people know the stat of around 97% of climate scientists agree that man-made actions are actually contributing to climate change and global warming. That leaves around 3% of supposed scientists who don't agree with that. They always get pumped up by the dirty energy industry, by climate change deniers, climate change denying politicians. Well, a group of scientists recently retested the climate deniers study. You wrote about it. What exactly did they find?
Yeah, so it was a really interesting study. It's a group of climate scientists. Some also write for websites like Climate, I think Climate Confidential. I don't know. Anyway, it was a group of scientists. Catherine Hayhoe, one of perhaps the better known ones in the group, and they looked at, I think it was like 27 mainstream contrarian studies. So those are studies that are published in the realm of climate science, but take the contrarian approach, which is that human activity does not contribute to climate change in any way whatsoever. And so this group looked at a bunch of these studies and basically tried to redo the studies and see kind of if they could also come to those same conclusions, and if not, which I think was their underlying hypothesis going in, if they weren't finding the same conclusions, then what was going wrong with these studies. And it provided a really interesting look at some of the mistakes, you could say, I guess.
That's being very kind. Maybe you don't want to get sued here or something like that. Mistakes, lies, deception. That's my words here, not yours. You can go with mistakes, though, if that's what you want to do.
Yeah, we'll call it mistakes. That these climate studies were making in order to arrive at their contrarian conclusions. And so one of the big things that they found, pretty widespread throughout all these studies, kind of the number one issue that they were finding was that a lot of these studies cherry-picked data. So they picked data that looked real good and created the models that they wanted when you looked at it in a very kind of narrow bandwidth. But when you included the larger data points, outside of kind of the narrow set that they chose, or perhaps a more complete picture, then it rendered a different sort of findings. And so one study that they looked at found, global cooling or no global warming for this 4,000-year period. But when they looked at the 60,000 years kind of on either side sort of bookended it, that they couldn't arrive at the same conclusion. So it only worked if you consciously or otherwise threw out this kind of larger context of data.
Right, and again, you're being very kind by saying it's a mistake. Although I think a lot of people would agree that it's lying and very much cherry picking the data. I guess. I mean, I think this is wonderful that they're doing this. But it's one of these things where still you have so many, I guess, semi-mainstream news organizations still pretending that the debate is out. Has this gotten any? I mean, I think yours is you're the only place I actually saw writing about this. Has this debunking of their studies gotten any coverage at all?
Yeah, not as much as one would think. I know one of the writers wrote about, or the authors of the paper wrote a kind of an op-ed about it in The Guardian, and then another one wrote about it on their climate blog, and I've seen a lot of those, but I didn't really see a lot of coverage, widespread sort of this happen, and I'm not really sure why that is. I think replication studies in general, from what I've seen, I know that there was unrelated but a different kind of meta study that came out about social science experiments being really difficult to replicate and kind of what that meant about both the studies and replication. So I don't know if just the mainstream scientific community kind of vault with these meta-analyses or whatnot. But I think that for anyone that studies climate change or is interested in that, or even is interested in just climate communication in the way that both media and scientists talk about climate change and approach these contrarian studies, I mean, I think that there's some real value in looking at this and kind of seeing, what we learn when a group of climate scientists go back and look at these contrarian studies and try to replicate the results and without fail, are unable to do that on 27, I think it was, or more of some of the most mainstream and talked about contrarian studies. And so it was a little surprising that I haven't seen more chatter about it, I would say.